Hi friends, good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of Observer Research Foundation, I welcome you all to our Friday afternoon talk, series number 10. And the topic of today's discussion is Re-Envisioning Regionalism in South Asia in post-COVID era. And of course, it's my privilege to moderate this session. But at the very outset, let me announce that initially in the schedule, we had 3 distinguished speakers, but unfortunately, Dr. David Brewster, who has been facing severe technical snags, so he will not be able to join us at this moment in this discussion. To initiate today's discussion, let me say a few words on the theme of this session. All of us, we are going through an unprecedented time. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it very clear to all of us that health crises are geopolitical events with far-reaching and long-lasting impacts across the globe. As the world has been grappling with the deadly coronavirus, there has been many disruptions across various global sectors, say for example, economy, society, public health, human security, and bilateral relationships, of course, between countries. COVID-19 has also compelled the world to envision its strategies of contestation as well as cooperation. In this scenario, regionalism is being very closely observed by world audience. And of course, as a corollary, a question is coming up to the forefront that what would be the nature of post-COVID world order. And of course, South Asia is no exception to this discourse. As we all know that South Asia as a region has become synonymous to South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, which is SAARC. And SAARC has been defunctional for the largest period ever since its creation since in 1985. Although the postponement and cancellation of SAARC summits have been happened before, and these are not new events. But this time, South Asian decision makers, they took pretty long time, nearly 6 years to sit together under a common umbrella. Initiative taken by Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, to convene a virtual SAARC conference over the COVID crisis. An emergency fund has been created to take care of this situation, to discuss the severity of pandemic. However, the feasibility of actions to be taken in this situation where each and every country is really struggling a lot to handle a situation where the numbers of affected cases are increasing day by day, it is not very clearly stated as yet. Along with these, the growing Chinese assertion also remains a critical point of discussion. And moreover, there lurks the threat of economic recession in the region. Against this backdrop, I have a couple of questions in mind, and I want to pose this question at the beginning of our discussion so that the discussion can go on and we can take up further questions as well. So my first question, how can the economy and regionalism be revived in South Asia? Secondly, will disruptions in global supply chain promote countries of South Asia to pursue intra-regional trade or even at the sub-regional level? Can we think of South Asian regionalism, frankly speaking, without China? Can the initiative of better connectivity in the region help the progress of revival of regionalism? What does the early impact of COVID-19 on small South Asian states in terms of their strategic environment in the region? And lastly, what should be the United States do to advance its interests in South Asia and broader Indo-Pacific strategy through its COVID-19 response. So these are few questions with which we can start. We have with us to discuss with these critical issues two distinguished speakers, Dr. C. Rajamohan, Director, Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and Professor Navneet Chadda Behra from Department of Political Science, Delhi University. And on behalf of Observer Research Foundation, we welcome our speakers. And I'll request both the speaker to confine initially 15 to 80 minutes, and the floor will be open for question answers and to make our discussion much more interactive. So I'll request Dr. Rajamohan to share his views first. So it's over to you, Raja.
No, thank you. Thank you, Anastasia. It's a delight to be here with the Observer Research Foundation. As you know, that I was there for 4 or 5 years in ORF, and the Calcutta chapter was started when I was there. So I always have a special affection for Calcutta chapter. So it's such a pleasure to be back with all of you in Calcutta. It's a pleasure also to be with Navneeta. We go back to long years ago. She's now, she's worked on the region a lot more than I have. So it's great to share the panel with her. So what I'll do is maybe, and so you asked a lot of questions, but let me address some of them and see how we can take this debate forward.
Yes, you can take, any question first. So it's over to you.
Thanks so much. I think one of the first questions you talked about, can regionalism be revived in South Asia? I'm afraid these are not good times for regionalism. These are not even good times for multilateralism. What we've seen happen for almost post-89, the end of the Cold War, the absence of great power rivalry, the expansion of the Washington Consensus, or the expansion of economic globalization, provided extraordinary conditions for many regions to come together. European Union, for example, really grew in the agenda, the ambition, everything grew after 1990. ASEAN and has expanded, set up a whole range of institutions in Southeast Asia and East Asia. And so you've seen then an expansion of regionalism galloping in many parts of the world. We've also saw this phase was one when multilateralism became a powerful force, that the end of the Cold War, that no great power was in conflict with another, and the emergence of global issues produced conditions where you could do a lot more in multilateral institutions. So I think, but unfortunately we are at a situation where that phase is coming to an end. The two conditions that produced globalization, the regionalism, regional integration was really a flip side to it. That is under stress. And the great power rivalries have come back. So what you have is actually a structural change that is unfolding in the international system that's going to make it harder, even for the organizations that have done very well in relation to regionalism. But of course, SAARC did not do too well in this great phase. I mean, they did something, but it did not do too well. And now it's even less likely that it would do very much under the present conditions. I might also be bold enough to say that actually the very notion of South Asia is probably undergoing a fundamental transformation. The way we think of this geography itself could change, but that's my last point. But before that, let me just say three, four themes. I mean, one, this idea that calamities will force human beings to think more nobly, more in elevated sense, that the nature's fury or a pandemic or an earthquake or a flood will compel people to think more above their immediate disputes and to work together. It's always been a dream, but it's really rarely works. I mean, there have been cases where where natural disasters produced impulses for cooperation, But the majority cases actually, it's very quickly the expectation returns to a reality of structural conflict that exists. So therefore, we shouldn't bet that the pandemic is going to necessarily force people to come together, certainly in South Asia. It certainly divided the world. That you saw what happened in the WHO, where actually a near confrontation with China. So therefore, and in fact, the notion, the concern or belief or the suspicion that China is actually responsible for this has actually sharpened the divisions in multilateralism. US has walked out of it. So you have actually a more messy situation in multilateralism and regionalism within Southeast Asia, for example, where the rise of China is actually deepening the divides within the region. It's mounting pressures on the unity of ASEAN. So actually you have the conditions are not pretty good. But coming to SAARC then, that actually, the SAARC, as I said, look, never, there were not many expectations of it, and it never really gone very far. But it's very fashionable to say least integrated region, South Asia, as you know, but none of that takes the historical condition of the region into account. That South Asia, the subcontinent, I rather prefer to use the term subcontinent. The subcontinent was a region that was a region before regionalism was invented. It was one region. The partition of the subcontinent into multiple sovereignties, 2 and then 3, profoundly altered the prospect for regionalism, and I think that legacy of that partition is still with us. The second tragedy was of inward economic orientation that most countries of South Asia adopted. Political partition did not necessarily mean you had to have economic partition, but the logic of socialism in one country, the logic of self-reliance produced a condition where everyone was a socialist, everyone was for self-reliance, and that produced actually a breaking up of the market. What was a single market in 1947 broke up into multiple pieces. It's not only the inward economic orientation, but even India, the largest entity of South Asia, was partitioned within economically. It's only now our Prime Minister talks about one nation, one tax. We didn't have that for a long time. Movement of intrastate movement of goods was not possible. You couldn't take your ration card from one place to another. So the internal fragmentation of the Indian market has been so persistent. It's only in recent years we're beginning to talk about overcoming it through GST, through various other measures. So there are the policies that we adopted. I mean, I'm not saying good or bad or making judgments on them, but the fact, those are facts, that the internal market within India too was fragmented. So therefore there were very little conditions for actually transcending these divisions. And the 1990s, as I mentioned, the emergence of globalization produced at least some rethinking. And we saw the region come together a little bit at least, and that all data indicates after 1990, when all countries adopted economic liberalization and globalization, all countries moved away from the state capitalism of the previous era. There has been some progress. There is increase in intra-regional trade, but it's nowhere near the levels of other regions. So therefore, we have the intra-regional disputes have not ameliorated; they've actually increased, and therefore the hope that 1990s, the external conditions that they created, that is not really we didn't take off then, and I think it's going to be hard. So are they? Meanwhile, already the region is looking at alternatives to SAARC. As you know, SAARC hasn't met since 2014. Not that much happens when it meets. Even when it meets, agreements that already negotiated. That's what I think people often forget what happened in 2014. And agreements on connectivity that were negotiated at the official level, agreements that were okayed by the ministerial level. The head of government of Pakistan walked back from it at the summit. So it is nice to say, look, we should get together, but the fact is, Pakistan doesn't want to do certain things. I mean, it is their sovereign right. I'm not saying Pakistan is good or bad. Pakistan establishment, if you will, is convinced that economic integration, the time has not come for, I'm not even talking about integration, economic cooperation with India, period. Now, that's a judgment they've made, and I think you have to respect that judgment. I mean, to go on whining that we've not done it, doesn't take analytically that Pakistan does not want economic cooperation until some other political issues are sorted out, which is against the logic in most places. People have disputes in Southeast Asia, but they keep cooperating. But Pakistan has taken a decision. I think we have to recognize it, which is a fact, and therefore you have to deal with it. So there is no. So SAARC in the present form can't sign a simplest agreement till you solve Kashmir problem. So then it tells you it's not going to happen. So I think that is number one. The second, that is compelled, I think, after 2014, for India to look at alternatives. One, it has tried the BBIN, that is a sub-regional cooperation, that within the region you can create a format. If not, you can't do whole of South Asia. Can we do a smaller subsection of South Asia? There, I think we've seen some progress especially because of India-Bangladesh relationship. But we've also saw that if we say, look, I'll have a transport agreement, Bhutan doesn't want too many people from the south. I mean, I don't want to say anything more on that the fact is a small country does not want to be overwhelmed by a larger ingress of population. So that again is a genuine concern. So the agreements that were made in terms of inter-regional transportation has not worked. But I think the very fact that the two large entities, that India, Bangladesh, are working together more today, has led to, I think, a significant expansion of sub-regional cooperation because of the political will in India and Bangladesh, and the commitment to overcome at least some aspects of partition. Unlike in the West, in the East at least, there is some commitment, some interest to overcome the legacy of partition. And that's why once we had the boundary agreement that helped resolve a lot of things. And then, of course, we could have made a lot more progress. Not all things have been done. But the fact is, India-Bangladesh thing today looks a lot better than it ever did before. So I think that's a positive sign, and that was only happening largely at the bilateral with a regional implication. We've seen electricity transfers. There is today a large market for electricity transfers between on the eastern subcontinent. So that's progress too. There is increasing trade intra-regionally within there. So that is the second alternative. Is to look at BIMSTEC, that is a trans-regional cooperation that brings in Southeast Asia. This predated the crisis in SAARC, in 2014, 1997, I think, if I'm right, that's when it started. But that too didn't go very far because economically, I don't think the South Asian nations were ready in the 90s to actually think boldly about the region. But today, it's still, BIMSTEC is a dream, but it's not really made any dramatic progress. There are some attempts at coastal shipping, some agreements. At least there is no political contestation of the level that you see in SAARC, hopefully. And more interestingly, since you asked a question about China, there is another trans-regional institution, it's called the BRI, that the Chinese today is one of the greatest initiatives of China in terms of size and consequence. Some see it as an alternative world order. The fact is, China today has 3 corridors running across the Himalayas: the China-Pakistan corridor, the China-Nepal corridor, which is being built, is close there, and the China-Burma economic corridor. So you have actually, China is the second largest world economy, is connecting up to South Asia, but here is a problem that India is opposed to BRI. So what you have is actually a new initiative, which is huge in terms of the resources it generates, but it is not going to automatically lead to regional integration. But what it does is it has consequences, whether India is in it or not. That brings me to the other part of alternatives to SAARC, which is really a positive unilateralism. That given the nature of the geography, India is the largest entity. It has borders with all the countries. Most others don't have with each other. So in India that is open to trade facilitation, gives better access to its market, to its smaller neighbors, will automatically happen. So I don't think we should get too obsessed with the form. Is SAARC working? Oh my God, SAARC is not working. Or instead of saying that, look, what can India do unilaterally to improve trade facilitation, to make access to its neighbors' goods, So these are in India's hands. It doesn't even have to negotiate with anybody. That in India, that improves a border infrastructure. We don't have to compete with the Chinese in building new roads. In Nepal, the geography is still with India. That goods are easier to move goods from Terai to India, easier to move goods from Bangladesh into India and to the Northeast than from China. So it is really a failure of Indian imagination of how quickly you can ramp up simple unilateral measures that can facilitate. It's not by imposition. It's not by, you create the incentives naturally to promote regional integration. And I think that's where the future is. It's how much we do unilaterally, what matters, rather than getting all the 8 countries into a room and saying, look, guys, negotiate. Even if we lock them up forever, they're not going to do it. So I think I think we should think of India's strategy for regionalism as opposed to SAARC as an entity that's going to deliver the regionalism. So let me conclude by just one thought, which I mentioned at the beginning. Is South Asia really a relevant concept? That the idea itself, or maybe Navneeta can go into it, it's fairly, the word didn't exist till at least certainly till the 80s. It was called the subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent. There were Indian studies departments around the world. They've all become South Asian departments now. Maybe they'll have to change their names again. The fact is the region is breaking up. That is, Pakistan is going to be deeply integrated with China and is going to be less connected. It has become less and less connected to India. That's a fact. Now, whether that will alter, I used to be an optimist, but I'm not so sure I am now. So therefore, the Chinese integration with Pakistan is going to be far more intense, and the CPEC is going to do it. So that's one. Second is countries are beginning to think of themselves beyond South Asia. For example, Sri Lanka sees itself as an Indian Ocean nation, that it sees itself as it has an Indian Ocean identity as opposed to South Asian identity. If we talk to the Sri Lankans today, we are in the center of the Indian Ocean, the Belt and Road, now Maritime Silk Road. We've always historically been at the center of the Indian Ocean. But today that centrality of its location in the Indian Ocean is being discovered. They don't have to be a forgotten tip of the Indian Ocean, of the subcontinent, but they're actually at the heart of the Indian Ocean. That's a very different geographic perspective Sri Lanka brings. Similarly, Maldives sitting on the 8-degree channel. All the world's busy shipping lines go through it. So it doesn't have to get stuck with South Asia to somehow SAARC, its deliverance is not in SAARC. Geography demands, it does some cooperation with India, but the Chinese are interested. I'm sure Americans will be interested. A whole lot of countries are interested. If you see what's going on in Maldives, the Saudi Arabia is interested, the UAE is interested. So I think this geography somehow, you can't keep geographies boxed up. So the larger forces operating, and I think that's going to happen. And Bangladesh also is a bridge between South Asia and East Asia. It can be bridged someday when BCIM happens. It's linked to Burma, it can be linked to China. So I think Bangladesh too is beginning to look at Bay of Bengal as a way of breaking out of the kind of the confines of South Asia. So I think the region had its day, didn't really have its day, but the notion of a geography called South Asia, I think is beginning to fade into irrelevance, and it's really each part of South Asia is going to look to different directions. But that does not mean the end of South Asia, or the subcontinent will still be there. The question is, can India do something in the subcontinent to change the dynamics, at least in parts where it can make a difference? That I think will make a difference. So it's really in Indian hands to produce a substantive amount of subcontinental unity, minus Pakistan, because Pakistan is not ready. Saying that is not a slur, or it is just a statement of fact. Therefore, what India does with the rest of the region and how it does it is the question. But China is going to be part of it. There is no escaping that. China as the second largest economy. We can't keep the Chinese out. They're going to come, whether we Indians want it or not. And therefore, that produces a new dynamic, and how that plays out is going to be equally consequential. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rajamohan. I think you have raised 2-3 very interesting questions. Of course, out of all these, what is very interesting is to conceptualize your point on positive unilateralism and the role of India. But definitely in this regard, a question is coming to my mind. Definitely it can be discussed later on, but what would be the role of a nationalistic fervor and India's assertion towards India's neighbors, specifically small state neighbors. So I would like to know your perception on that, maybe later. And of course, you have raised very interesting notion of South Asia, and according to you, the South Asia is going through a transition. As we all know, as a student of international relations, how the region has come up and how the definition of the entire South Asian region has gone through, the process of exclusion and inclusion. When we conceptualize South Asia, then there was no Afghanistan, and and again, when Afghanistan has been included in the entire regional definition has been changed. So I would also like to know from you, when you are telling that the region is going through transformation, would you like to have a different definition of South Asia in this regard? So I'll come back to you, Raja, with these questions. And now I'll request Professor Navneeta Chadda Behera to share her views with us. Navneeta?
Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned about, re-envisioning South Asia and post COVID-19 situation, the first thought that came to my mind was what Raja was saying. Okay, do we have a South Asia happening here? What exactly are we re-envisioning? And are we even able to see a post COVID-19 situation, considering right now we are in the thick of it? And if we were to just look at the COVID situation, and I'm just going to take a minute or two with that, I think that itself speaks a lot. The region is going through very differential roadmap on COVID. India is, of course, the worst hit. Pakistan is next. But there are states which are doing very well. Sri Lanka is doing very well. There is Bhutan, which has kept the situation under control. And yet we find, besides the tokenism of setting up the emergency fund, there is virtually no sharing and learning of experiences of each other. You do not find South Asian countries in a real sense standing next to each other and lending out a helping hand. And when I say helping hand, it is in terms of sharing technology, it is in terms of sharing short medical supplies that are desperately needed in some parts. It is in terms of even sharing sectoral cooperation in the scientific community, vaccine research, or in any ways, any parameters you could pick up. And you would find that South Asia has sort of just gone by the kind of wayside, and individual countries are asserting themselves as individual nation states, and the region has sort of taken a back seat. I agree to some extent. It's what Radha said, that the global situation itself is changing. The geopolitical landscape and the geostrategic landscape is changing. The structural equations are undergoing a change, and Raja has already talked about it. So I don't want to kind of waste audience's time in repeating the same point. But yes, the fact remains that globally the situation is changing. But I think more interestingly, the impact, or at least the big Trojan horse, is right next door, China. Even in the global situation undergoing a change, China is playing a hugely important role right now. In case of South Asia, even more so, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. But I do want to go back to your the original question as to, is there hope for the regionalism to survive? The impetuous from top is a countercurrent, if I can call it that way at this point of time. It is not only helping regionalism, it is actually, the forces are already underway that are undercutting any multilateral understandings that the states have had, for a long time. And if I were to look at China, I think it's playing a huge role in pulling the countries in different directions. I mean, look at India and Nepal today. 5 years ago, I don't think anybody would have envisaged the kind of rhetoric, the kind of angst, the kind of anger, the kind of statements that are being shared by the top leadership in the two countries. I mean, territorial conflict between India and Nepal, unheard of. When we were students, India has had problems with all its border countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, but Nepal was definitely never on the list. Today it is. If you were to look at our domestic discourse, we find that we are the ones who are bringing China in by repeatedly referring to Prime Minister Oli becoming a sort of a handmaiden in the hands of China. So even if China was the China shadow was not as large as it is, I think we also have a role in making it even look larger rather than minimizing its impact. We are kind of inadvertently and consciously augmenting the role of China, and in terms of its sort of stamp on what South Asian region looks like, and that is not just true for sort of Bhutan, Nepal. Look at Bhutan. The Chinese claims on Bhutanese territories that is actually not speaking to Bhutan. Of course, it's speaking to India indirectly. Chinese investments in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Raja has already gone in much detail. In Sri Lanka, so I think China is the elephant in the room. If you're talking about South Asian regionalism, that you can't really conceive the next steps or the future without taking into account what the elephant in the room is wanting to do or is steering it in that direction. What was different about South Asia? I mean, again, the SAARC region, SAARC as an organization, SAARC as a regional cooperation network, never really delivered on the promise that it had. It was promising, yes, but it's been a story of missed opportunities, if not failures, than those of successes. And again, I'm just sort of trying to address some of the different aspects that probably Raja did not have time to address, although he was so comprehensive that it's sort of difficult to fill in his shoes. But one thing is that in the latter life of SAARC in the last 10 to 15 years, I would say the impetuous was coming from below as much as from the governmental level. So we were witnessing a lot of regional cooperation initiatives that had very little governmental inputs. But whether it was to do with water sharing, whether it was to do with trade issues, whether it was to do with cultural aspects, socio-cultural interactions, going back to the civilizational sort of linkages that were there. There was a groundswell that we witnessed for last 10 years. I remember in the heyday 10 years ago, there were a whole lot of organizations were being born to basically play supportive role to the SAARC, which was independent, intellectually driven. There were SAARCs in Nepal. There was another organization run by, I remember, Professor Rahman Soban in Bangladesh. We have our own South Asian University, bang here in New Delhi. We have regional RCSS in Sri Lanka. So there were a lot of these non-governmental, academic, intellectual, cultural forces that were actually doing a lot of interesting work to think of ways where South Asians, if not South Asia, as a region was still sort of coming together. That groundswell seems to have once again lost its impetus, lost its driving force, lost its motivation. We don't see much of that happening. Whether I look at South Asian University now, whether I look at RCSS, or whether I look at the fate of SAARC or other such initiatives, where do you see them today? So there is something that is missing, not just if you were to look at the top-down reality, there is also something amiss if you were to look at the bottom-up groundswell that we witnessed for almost a decade or two in between. The year of 2000, the last decade I remember, was very, very driven and positive on some of these initiatives. And they do seem to have kind of lost initiative. When we look at SAARC in terms of, what Raja also touched on, are there really any alternatives to it? He has already talked about some of the sub-regional initiatives, so I would not want to repeat that. But one of the alternatives to South Asia was, again, in the ideational domain. Can we change a state-driven idea of South Asia? Can we have a civilizational notion of South Asia, which is building together its communities, not necessarily with the help of their governments, and sometimes despite their governments sort of coming in the way. So is there hope, to put it in a different way, is there hope on that side of the story? Is that likely to play any differently in the coming years, if I could say so? COVID-19 situation has been exceptionally different, and what we're witnessing right now does not make me very optimistic, to be honest, because as I flagged in the beginning, even though the governmental level there is tokenism, cooperation, even in the sectoral level, among the scientific community, among the academic community, among the intellectual community, among the journalists, among the NGO sector, among all different layers of your non-state actors, you don't really hear much about sharing of experiences of having to learn to fight COVID. Now I agree with Raja that it's very rare that adverse pandemic-like situations necessarily teach people to work together, to think together, to live together. But that civilizational reality, I would have hoped somewhere would kick in. It yet has not. But if there was one basket where I would put my hope in, it would be this basket. I would look to, this amorphous, diffused communities of South Asians that don't necessarily look up to their governments towards working towards the common goals that they might have. What do they do? And if there is one most important, single most danger that I can see to it, is actually I see it from within India. Raja kind of closed it on a very positive note of positive unilateralism, that India has to think, what is it that it can do to keep South Asia together? The onus lies, or I wouldn't say onus, but the bigger responsibility certainly lies on the Indian leadership and their shoulders. But that's where I find there is less room, relatively speaking, for optimism, because the domestic imperatives, to the extent that they are shaping our regional outlook and our aspirations for South Asia, gives me room for concern, if not a worry altogether. I'll give you a very small snippet incident that perhaps conveys my point. Just today morning, I read a small news item that a Nepalese citizen in Varanasi was forcibly head shaven, forced to chant Jai Shri Ram and anti-Nepalese slogans. This is unheard of. Nepal is a Hindu nation. It's more Hindu nation than we are. So to force a Nepalese citizen to chant Jai Shri Ram logically would not make sense to my mind. But what I'm just saying is we are beginning to look in Nepal as an other, something that we were doing for Pakistan and perhaps for other countries. And this othering practice, as much as it is taking root within the country, if that becomes the root of our outlook towards a region, then we really have very little hope to look to future. I sincerely hope that does not play out the way perhaps one reads. It's heading in the direction. As I said, I still pin a lot of my hopes on this amorphous, diffused values that go back centuries, the values that do bind Indian subcontinent together, not the geopolitical unit of South Asia, but there's something that goes much deeper than what the governments have to do, much deeper than the foreign relations of the country, much deeper, at a level of a kind of a shared humanity, a shared civilizational ethos that the Indian subcontinent has. But the trouble is that civilizational ethos going to articulate itself, going to mobilize itself, even in the societal domain, leave aside the political domain, is a very difficult scenario for offering any concrete sort of parameters or yardsticks. I can't really offer if this and this were to happen. We see those civilizational values reasserting themselves. I think we are in a flux. We are, as a country, as a region, we are undergoing a certain kind of churning of thought process, of values that we hold dear, the values that we always thought we had, but they are being called into question now. And that's not the story of India alone. That is indeed the story of other countries too. And it's interesting how, if there was one vantage point and if there was one concrete advantage that India would have in keeping Indian subcontinent together, as compared to China, which in today's date has much more military muscle, economic power, these deep pockets of finances, which every country is looking for, especially as each economy is hit very severely due to COVID-19 situation. China has the deep pockets to help financially all the countries that they're looking for. What China does not have is these civilizational linkages. So I really hope India, when it thinks of its strategy for bringing Indian subcontinent together, because I agree with Raja that the bigger responsibility would lie on Indian leadership shoulders. I hope we are conscious of that, and I hope we cultivate that in a positive way, in a constructive way, rather than in a divisive way. I think that's the way forward if we were to re-envision South Asia, and I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Navnita, for sharing your thoughts. I think you have very interestingly pointed out the importance of civilizational ethos and civilizational linkages. While you are nurturing these ideas, I was thinking about the future of connectivity projects and connectivity programs. Because through these current connectivity projects, at least eastern part of South Asia, especially Indian eastern part, along with Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, as well as stretching a bit towards Southeast Asia, like Myanmar and Thailand, they are constantly, they are trying to keep it alive, these civilizational linkages. But my question would be, naturally, what would be the nature of these connectivity projects? This is number one. And of course, taking cue from Raja's point of positive unilateralism, naturally, I was thinking of the idea of non-reciprocity. Once when we were in our university days, that idea came from I.K. Gujral, and it was never followed as it was desired. Okay, so I would like to raise this issue to both of you. How do you visualize the role of India to pursue this positive unilateralism? Because in that way, India's assertiveness, India's nationalistic fervor, as well as India's not following that non-reciprocity policy, it will come up in our discourse. And of course, India's neighborhood first policy will be definitely will be talked about if we want to critically evaluate Raja's point of positive unilateralism and the role of India so far as this South Asian region is concerned. So with these few words, I will open up the floor for further discussion, and I'll take up question and answers. Already chat box is flooded with various questions. So some questions are being asked to both of you. So I would like to have both of yours, your observations on these particular question. Say, for example, first question has been posed that as South Asia's dependency on China expands beyond economy and into the domain of medical aid, will the functioning of the regional organizations be swayed in China's favor? Which means the entire region is not only dependent on Chinese economic aid, but also increasing dependency on China's medical aid as well. So medical aid, along with testing kits and all others during this pandemic situation. So this is number one. Number two is also related to unilateralism in a way, because it has been asked that when South Asia, was as a region, it was conceived all through since its inception, reflexive nationalism has worked. So under this situation, how hopeful you are about SAARC in the future? And is it time to write an obituary of SAARC, or SAARC will remain as it is? Well, the next question I have received is in relation to bilateralism. As we all know that South Asian states are very much obsessed with bilateralism. So again, if we relate this concept of bilateralism to Raja's positive unilateralism, do you think it has a kind of correlation between them? So we can start with these three questions, then again, I will take up further 3 or 4 questions and the discussion will go on. It's over to you first, Raja, then Navnita.
The burden of the argument we made is to avoid formalism. See that this not, is it really matter if SAARC is alive or dead? The more important functional thing is, look, are the countries cooperating with each other? Are they trading with each other? So it's not the form of cooperation that matters. What matters is actual cooperation that changes ground realities. And that is the far more important thing, rather than whether SAARC is there or not. I mean, SAARC is really a means to an end, which is about actually functionally facilitating cooperation. So I think we should focus more on that rather than has SAARC worked or not, how many summits, when did the last time they meet? I mean, it's really a detail rather than now. Like, for example, as I said, I mentioned illicit trade. There's no great region-wide agreement, but we've seen more grids are crossing across. There's India supplies more electricity to Nepal, to Bangladesh. So there is movement now. Bangladesh wants to buy from Nepal. Bangladesh wants to buy from Bhutan. So that is progress. I mean, that there is actually, that it was crazy not to have traded with electricity in the past, but today we're trading electricity because some places have surplus, some places have deficit. So that is progress. I mean, that is regional cooperation, not what we did in a meeting in the SAARC. So SAARC is not going anywhere. I mean, I don't see why it is so, no, I don't see what is unclear there. I mean, it's not going anywhere, period. I mean, that's a fact as a realist to start with that. But we've seen actually cooperation advance. We've seen between India, Bangladesh. Today, Bangladesh, Nepal are talking about Bangladesh, Bhutan are talking about interesting things. So that's what is more important than the structure and the form. It is really the function, is the functions, have they improved? The second, I think the non-reciprocity, look, I think that was Gujarat, and since then, in the UPA government, there was this, tariff concession that India gave, but there are a lot more things you can do. So it is again, it's not a mantra that look, the more market interdependence, the benefits are. So it's not a favor that India does. Again, I think we have to get over this, that India doing a favor by being, non-reciprocal. That it benefits us as well. That if more investment in Indian investment can go into the textile sector, it is actually going, whether there is SAARC or not, because you talked about, somebody asked about the implications on the region. Bangladesh is getting more, is a bigger textile exporter than India is. It tells you something, that after China, Bangladesh is the biggest textile exporter. And that actually has opened up interesting possibilities for India and Bangladesh to cooperate, where we give better access to the market, the Indian investment can go there. So I think it is that change that we need to facilitate, that it's in India's interest where it is possible. I think India has done things. For example, if the Bangladesh had gone to the International Court of the Permanent Court of Arbitration on the maritime dispute, if we left it to the Indian government, they would have negotiated for another 100 years, because it was by no means, it was more in favor of Bangladesh. But India said, okay, politically, it's a good thing. We take off one more issue off the table. Let's work together. So, and that too has helped create a different environment. So I think it's not a special gesture, that it is, again, I think if you start with the assumption, what is in my interest? The rest is really how you pursue those interests is secondary, and that in the process, if they too benefit from it, it's even better. And I think on the Chinese, look, I think we're still talking as if China is an external factor. You see, look, China is the second largest economy in the world, about to overtake the United States at $14 trillion. India is at 3. So it's an economy, next door, which is 5 times bigger than Indian economy. So Chinese don't have to do anything, don't have to be nice to us, nasty to us. Just the fact that you have a magnet next door is going to have consequences. So will that change everything? We should get upset, everything Chinese money comes in. Look, if I were a Nepali, I say, look, you take in Chinese money and you complain about my doing something with China. We've just discovered India's biggest investments in the India's digital sector are from China. We have $90 billion trade with China, and you tell others, oh my God, are you trading with China? I mean, this is, unbelievable hypocrisy, if I might use the word. We want to sit with them and rake, we want to sit with them in the breaks, and we say, oh, we are for multipolar world. And of course, we're always non-aligned. So your neighbors are showing you what non-alignment is. They want to be non-aligned between India and China. They want to benefit from both, just as we benefited from US and Soviet Union in the past. So they're doing, Navnita is the political scientist, she went to this classic 101 political science that countries try to balance. Why should it be shocking or something that we continuously debate, surprised, outraged? There is a large economy, its effects are going to be felt. So the question for us is, look, what is your strategy? With your neighbors, look, there is another power that is in the neighborhood, which is bigger economic power, more purposeful state. It's not shaving the heads of Nepalese, if that story is true, who are going through Nepal, Beijing. So I think then we've created this outrage nationalism on a daily basis, which is I think, doing so much damage. I mean, I hope the Indian government bans some of these channels. It's not just the Nepali government. I mean, that we are hurting ourselves with this for nationalism, whipping ourselves into a frenzy about everything without actually strategizing. Okay, there is a new situation here. A great power has risen in Asia. It is everybody's biggest trading partner. If China is doing things in Panama, wants to building railway lines in Venezuela, and we are upset here, they're coming to Nepal and Bangladesh. So that's the reach today they have. And I think medical, digital, phones, everything, Chinese are going to be there. Any issue we consider, internet governance, trade, global institutions, in everything, China is going to be a factor. So that is the reality we have to address rather than the minor consequences of that impact of what China has on us. So again, I think on bilateralism, look, I think we should not get again obsessed with this, the IR phrases, look, Deng Xiaoping said, look, whichever way you can skin the cat. See, the color of the cat is not the thing. Look, if the river waters demand multilateral engagement, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan working together, you might get better results on river basin management than trying to do it just between India and Bangladesh. I mean, that is, again, you start from the first principles rather than are we doing bilateralism or are we doing unilateralism or are we doing multilateralism. Thing is, how do you get things done? What is the best way of dealing with the waters issue? I think that I use the unilateralism in the sense of what India can do to facilitate this process. But the rest of it, it doesn't matter which format. And in fact, we should, whatever our neighbors feel comfortable with. If somebody feels comfortable with having another person in the room, we should say, yes, let's bring. And when it serves a purpose, it's even better because, so I would say, I will not worry too much about that. But the important thing, again, focus on function, interest and function rather than the devices that we need to do.
Thanks a lot, Raja. Navnita, your observations?
Actually, I'll keep it very brief because, as I said,
please.
It's very difficult to follow Raja. He's so comprehensive. And it's a delight to listen to him. The one word that stuck me when you talk about, should we write an obituary of SAARC? And I thought, hasn't that already been written several times over in the past 10 or 20 years? I remember having seen newspaper articles, headings, is it time to write obituary of SAARC? So I think that's kind of done and dusted kind of a problem. SAARC is effectively dysfunctional and will remain so because the very core principle of SAARC was you can only work with consensus. And there is no consensus as of today in the South Asian region. And if you, I mean, I was talking about China, but if I hate to use the Kashmir word because then the discussion completely gets hijacked by India and Pakistan. Yes. But if the premise is that Pakistan will not cooperate with India on economic issues, still political issue being resolved, aka Kashmir, that's a non-starter. You're not going to go anywhere, for the next 50 years with that one. So I agree with Raja that SAARC as a mechanism, as a forum, as a organization, it's unlikely to fulfill the promise that it held out 30 or 40 years ago whenever it was kind of 85, it was created. So I would not waste too much of my time and energy on seeing whether SAARC succeeds or not. Point remains that whether the region and whether the people in the region are able to come together or not. So to that extent, I agree. Are we getting things done? And what is the strategy we have? And on that, I just have to offer one point on, whether it's positive unilateralism or bilateralism or the link between two. At this point of time, I think India is also not quite completely clear on its so-called bilateralism strategy. So I think it's all these all these parameters and frames are really up for a toss right now. Let me give you one example. It's a very intriguing thing for the Nepalese government to time and again keep saying to India that we want foreign secretary talks to talk about this Kalapani issue and the territory issues. And Indian government is not coming forward for bilateral talks. So what future you have? What are we talking about bilateralism? We're not wanting to sit down and talk about the issue that only concern these two countries. So I think the forums per se are really in a meltdown stage. There is no sanctity attached to a particular problem being resolved only through bilateralism or only through multilateralism. You will have to go by what the problem what the challenge being thrown up in today's context is, and what perhaps is your best strategy or best foot forward to address it, and basically take it from there. There are no givens. There are no tried and tested methods anymore. As I said, the game is really being written or rewritten afresh. So what is going to work is to have an open mind and not be bogged down by old principles, because the game itself has changed. The basic pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are not the same. They're very differently placed right now. So are we constantly upping our game? Are we constantly able to think through as to how best to meet the kind of challenge that India is facing? One thing I can say is that, and again using the old terminologies, India's argument of wanting to play a big role in Asia, the foundation of that had to stay with a very stable, cohesive, powerful South Asia. If South Asia is going to fragment, that also has implications for India's strategic scenarios and aspirations, not just in the region, but also in the wider Asia Pacific region as well. So we need to be aware of a wider theater in which we are wanting to play a role, but being hemmed in because of what's happening in our neighborhood to go together. Also.
Yeah, thank you, Navneeta, for taking one important aspect into our discussion, that is wider Indo-Pacific. I am getting many questions regarding this wider Indo-Pacific and what would be India's role and how India can play its own strategic game. Well, I would like to flag these questions that I have received in chat box. The question which I have posed in the beginning, the similar question I have received, that regarding the role of United States. As we have discussed role of China and how we can discuss South Asia without China, whether it is possible or not. Similarly, the question has been raised regarding role of China to advance its interest in South Asia and also broader Indo-Pacific strategy through its COVID-19 response. This is number one. Also, the question has been raised regarding the role of middle powers, say for example, Japan, South Korea, and of course, India is also there. So we would like to know your perceptions, both of your perception regarding the role of middle powers and how it will have a kind of impact on South Asian dynamics. And also I have received another interesting question regarding Asia-Africa growth corridor, and also what would be its impact on South Asian dynamics. Yeah, it's over to you, both Raja and Navneeta.
Go first, Navneeta, you want to start?
This is really up your.
Please feel free. Absolutely.
No.
We are having a free and frank discussion. So,
Yeah. No, I would urge you, Raja, go ahead, please, because
you have raised broader Indo-Pacific.
Okay.
Unmute yourself, Navnita.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First, let me get the question right. Was the question about China's role in Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific?
No.
Was the role of US?
US role in Indo-Pacific, as USA is a natural ally to India. So how will it have a kind of impact on South Asian dynamics?
Okay. First of all, I personally would like to say that that's not really my domain of research for the last few years, but here is what I quickly have to offer. In the given situation, I am not very sure India can look to US as its natural ally. I think there are issue-specific scenarios where they have, there is a ground for them to come together. And at the same time, there are issues where they diverge, and they diverge very strongly. We've seen what has been unfolding in the last couple of weeks on the issue of H-1B visas, on the international students, on trade issues, India being pulled up in WHO. So US is particularly, I would qualify US under President Trump's administration, I don't think is a steadfast natural ally of India, or for that matter, any other country. So it would depend on what domain, what issue area, what is the puzzle that you're trying to address, and the jigsaw puzzle of the interests of US, China, Pakistan, India, middle powers, where do they fit on in that particular domain? I would segregate that rather than passing a very blanket kind of an assessment as to whether they are an ally or not. Middle powers, again, it depends on what are we talking about. I mean, COVID-19, one of the most interesting things that has been coming together is, while the whole world is trying to hold China accountable for its role, Japan has been very quiet. In terms of also the medical assistance that was Japanese provided to the China when Wuhan crisis was going on, and later on when Tokyo and other regions were, going through one of the worst phases, Alibaba and many other private actors actually stepped up their act in terms of, extending medical assistance to Japan. And I think Japan is also being very smart in not blindly sort of following America in the ante that is being raised vis-a-vis China, whether it is in South China Sea or in a general multilateral forum, be it WHO or WTO. Japan is also modulating its strategy depending on the issue at stake, which is pretty much, I would say, instinctively is the way to go for India too. Whether it's WHO or WTO or South China Sea, it has to be what the issue at stake is demanding, and where do India's interests lie, and not just to become kind of a follower or a ally, just lining up behind the United States of America. In terms of the Asia-Africa growth corridor, I would say that's a playground right now where India is no match for China. And I don't even know whether it's worth competing. Whether you need to play to your strengths. You need to play to your advantage. Raja gave some figures in Chinese economy, $14 trillion. I remember last year when I was traveling through Africa for the first time, in South Africa, in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, and other parts, you have malls with Chinese language written all over there, and Chinese presence is so robust in the cities and in the rural areas, because of the kind of investments that China is doing. So I think India needs to identify the niche areas where, in terms of, for example, solidarity on the climate change negotiations, for example, solidarity on some of the trade negotiating issues. So India needs to play to its strengths, in terms of retaining its friendships and retaining its countries in Africa, rather than just blindly be chasing as to whatever China is doing to try and do better. I think that's a very ineffective use of your limited resources that you have, and not quite a smart way of strategizing to actually achieve what your core interests are. The problem at this point of time is, I don't know whether Indian leadership itself is very clear as to what their core interests really are, whether it is to do with the Asia-Africa corridor or whether it is to do with the middle powers game that is being played. For example, BRICS, after Chinese came up with their own bank, what is the role that we are playing in BRICS? To what extent can we use that as a forum? So I would just end by saying that India needs to think through its core interests, and then, depending on the issue at stake, identify as to who its allies and partners in the game are. That may vary from one issue to the other, rather than come up with a general paradigm. General paradigms are passé in this contemporary context. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. Raja,
you want to take the next? I think she's covered everything, I think, quite comprehensively. I just say one word on the Asia. See, I think those of us who work in IR, on foreign policy, diplomacy, we must keep putting this, not go with just a concept. Okay, concept has been announced. So those of us who do research should say, look, what's actually happened since then? So I think that we need to focus on the practical outcomes from a statement. Look, on the face of it, Japan is very eager to develop its profile. They've had summits. In fact, now they include Africa in the Indo-Pacific, east coast of Africa. Africa is a rising economy. Everyone wants to have a pie of that. And you have India's investments. India's trade has dramatically grown. Not as much as Chinese, but it is growing. I mean, that India has a presence in Africa. We're ramping up our diplomatic presence. But in terms of a growth corridor, jointly working with other partners, we've not been pretty good at working, doing a collaborative ventures with third countries. And I think that's part of a problem. Really, I mean, as far as I can see, very little has happened, in terms of promoting India-Japan partnership in Africa. But both of our profiles separately are rising. So if we can do something together, that'd be great. But at this point, it's still a concept. And I think we need to, it'll take a long time before it can get implemented.
Yeah, Raja, may I ask you one small question, as I have received another question in chat box. It is regarding maritime issues. Do you think that India's involvement in maritime issues in the Bay of Bengal and also in extended Indian Ocean will help India to gain its importance in Indo-Pacific?
Look, I mean, we have thousands of kilometers of a coastline. It's not a question of taking interest. I mean, if you don't want to do anything, that's what we didn't do anything for all these years. You didn't have to wait for some American to invent Indo-Pacific. You have a massive coastline. But as I said, your inward-oriented economic strategy meant you did not have much value for the sea. Till 1990s. I mean, you were not trading with anybody. In fact, you say others were not welcome. Except importing oil from the but you are really not a trading nation. It's only in the 1990s we became a trading nation. So it's not a question of now we take interest. It should have taken interest from the beginning. We are taking some interest, but I think there is a huge amount of work we need to do on our maritime side, which is there again. I think the speech on Sagar or Sagarmala, that how much of it has been implemented. Have we built, how many new ports have we built in the last 5 years or 10 years? what are we, say, for example, with coastal shipping? I mean, I think the Bay of Bengal, look, it's not easy to just do simple coastal shipping trade between India, Bangladesh, and Burma. There have been some negotiations. Again, ORF as Calcutta has done a lot of work on connectivity. I would certainly say, look at the coastal shipping agreements. What have we done? Why are we not doing enough? Of facilitate, and everybody talks of building a road all through the Northeast into Burma. You can just do simple, make it easier for shipping laws to take place.
Right.
Make better use of Andaman and Nicobar territory. So this doesn't need to be part of anything. It is part of your development. If we do that right, that has consequences.
Yes, yes. Frankly speaking, I'm so engrossed with this discussion and your deliberations. I was totally, totally forgotten to see my watch, that we are very closing to finish the entire program, and we don't have much time in our hand. And after Raja, I don't want to reiterate the same thing. Rather, I would like to keep all these, notional and structural frameworks in my mind, where we will put stress on flexibility. And of course, as both the speakers have identified the role of India, which will be very, very crucial in the near future, keeping the fact in mind, the positive structural unilateralism. And definitely another important word has been coined by Dr. Rajamohan, that is, neighbors also have a right to be non-aligned. It is very, very interesting, very, very interesting statement. And of course, Professor Behra has talked about various things, but my takeaway is she has, put stress on strengthening solidarity in different aspects, where we share commonalities, common concerns, like coastal issues, like maritime issues, like climate change. And also she has talked about importance of civilizational ethos and civilizational linkages. With these few words, I would like to end our discussion. I know lots of other questions still are waiting, but I think next time maybe. So thank you so much on behalf of Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, entire team. We are grateful to both the speakers for sharing their thoughts so frankly and so efficiently. Thank you so much. Please be safe and be happy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, and all the best.
Yes.
Bye, Navneet.
Yeah, thanks.